Continuous improvement comes in lots of different flavors and styles. I'm Bella Engelbach, and I'm inviting you to journey with me to the edges of lean. Episode 124, Continuously Improving Your Dissertation with Dr. Jen Harrison. Have you earned an advanced degree? What was the dissertation process like for you? Have you thought about going back to school for a Ph.D? Are you wondering how to succeed and come out of the process with new knowledge, ready for your next challenge, and with your continuous improvement skills and self-confidence intact and honed? Dr. Jen Harrison works with students as a dissertation coach, and she joined me at the Edges of Lean to share the pitfalls and the keys to success with researching and writing your dissertation, all while becoming a more collaborative person. Jennifer Harrison, Dr. Jen, welcome to the Edges of Lean.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
It's very nice to have you here today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and what you're doing now?
Absolutely. So currently I am a dissertation coach, and there aren't too many of those out there. I actually did a PhD myself. I did mine in the United Kingdom. And that was a long while ago. I graduated in 2009. And after I finished my PhD, I worked in academia for a while. I was a professor. I had my kids, and so I switched to doing a boring desk job for a little while, and that lasted all of 5 minutes. It didn't suit me at all. So while my kids were still very young, I trained as a secondary school teacher. And so I worked in classrooms for a few years, teaching young people up, from the ages of 11 up to 18. And then we decided we were going to come back to the United States because this is where all my family was. And so I went back into academia, and I was a professor again until COVID hit. And when COVID did hit and everything was up in the air and nobody knew kind of where they were, I saw that a lot of students were really struggling with that transition to learning online. I'd been seeing issues that students were having anyway with trying to complete graduate degrees. And I realized that I had something that a lot of professors don't have, which is classroom training. I'm actually trained to be a teacher, and a lot of professors are not. And I have something that a lot of teachers don't have, which is I'm very familiar with academia and higher education research and how that works. And so I decided during COVID that I would leave academia and start my own business. And so now I do the work I used to do as a professor, but I do it privately and for the students who really need it and really want it. And it's been a fantastic transition.
Well, that is a very unusual career path, and I love that it's one that you chose for yourself, and that you found your own way to use all of the skills and your talents in what you're doing today. And I'm really fascinated about this idea of a dissertation coach, which is not the same as being on somebody's dissertation committee, right, or being a dissertation advisor, but a dissertation coach. Because in Lean, we're all about coaching, and we're all about, how do you help people find their way, or find their own way, as a guide by the side, as some people say, rather than as some sort of somebody who's looking to catch you doing something wrong. So how do people at what point do people say, I need some different kind of assistance with this? What brings them to that point?
Sure. So the ideal obviously would be that people start their degrees and think, let me get the help I need right now so that I'm in a good place throughout my degree. It very rarely happens like that. I'd say 5% of the students who come to me are there. Most people come to me when everything has reached the breaking point, when they are absolutely at the critical mass moment of I'm going to give up and not do this anymore and I can't take it, or I'm going to get some help. And that's usually when they reach out to me. So what often happens is expectations and reality in a graduate degree are very misaligned a lot of the time. A lot of these programs don't have the support in place that students need. Now, whether that's because the programs are a little bit optimistic and idealistic about what students are going to be able to manage, or whether they're just poorly designed, or, there's a whole variety of reasons, but it's very, very common that the supervisors don't have the time, energy, or skills to give the support the students need. The students themselves have not been prepared with the skills that they need for a graduate degree. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of poor kind of materials given to the students. So, there might be a rubric that is inconsistent, or they might have a template that's 3 years out of date, or whatever it might be. The normal sources of information that students get used to throughout their educations are suddenly not there anymore. And there is an expectation that they will just kind of manage that. And many, many students struggle with that. There's also a lot of competitiveness in higher education and in advanced degrees. And so there isn't that culture of offering help, of asking for help, of admitting that you don't know what you're doing. So all of that kind of comes together to leave these students in this position where they're told, you've got to get this submitted by next month. And they're thinking, well, I have no idea. I have no idea what's wrong with this piece of work or how I can fix it, what I need to do next. I just don't know what to do. And that's usually the point at which they come to me. And I do, you said it's different to being on a dissertation committee, and it is. I'm kind of this strange hybrid of your supervisor, your best friend, your mother. So I kind of fill all of these roles with these students. And I'm just my role is to be the person who is there with answers and support when they need it, telling them what to do next, how to do it, how to feel okay while they're doing it, and how to kind of thrive and look after themselves and still get the work done.
And are you sort of field non-specific, that if somebody comes to you and they're working on something in biochemistry, it would be all right. And also if they were working on something, I don't know, in history,
Yes.
you could still provide them support?
Absolutely. Because I don't do what a supervisor in a department does. I don't have knowledge of biochemistry. I don't have knowledge of a particular field of history. I can dabble a little bit, but I don't have that level of knowledge. But what I do have is I know what a dissertation should look like. What should good research look like? When they tell you you've got to synthesize sources in your lit review, I know what that means and how it works. Or, when they say we need you to validate how you're collecting this data, I know the methods and the terminology. And so that's where my kind of expertise lays. So I have actually got one of my favorite clients at the minute is doing work with genomics. And I only understand maybe one word in 10 that she says. She's so super smart. She's doing things to solve childhood cancer. I mean, you are amazing, but I'm not helping her with that. She knows that stuff. What I'm helping her with is, well, how are you actually going to get this down onto the page? What should that abstract look like? How are you going to meet that deadline?
Do you find that students struggle with the writing part as well, that they haven't been prepared to write the way they need to write?
Definitely. Yeah. There's a lot of norms and expectations around writing in graduate degrees that I think only really get dabbled with in undergraduate degrees. And so students kind of think they maybe know how to do APA, or they maybe know what it means to avoid passive voice, or perhaps they have a rough idea of how to set up an argument. But then suddenly they're expected to be expert at it. And a lot of them struggle with that. And then I also work a lot with students who are not English as a first language, or their writing skills might be a little bit weaker. And so they kind of need that help to get the writing sounding and looking the way it's expected on the page, because they don't have that bank of knowledge in their heads of what it should look like.
That must be incredibly difficult. I mean, to be doing that on top of everything else that needs to be done, and this idea that you're producing some new piece of knowledge that nobody else has, it's a tremendous amount of pressure. I have a story from my own family. I won't say which member of my family it was, but she was doing her master's degree at a well-known and prestigious university. And she was 8.5 months pregnant when she was supposed to be defending her thesis. And she went into labor early. And she reached out to her advisor and said that she wasn't going to be able to defend the thesis because she was in the hospital having the baby. And he wrote back to her and said, well, it doesn't matter. You would have failed anyway. And what shocked me about that, Dr. Jen, was that if she was that unprepared to defend her thesis at that point, that somebody should have given her an indication ahead of time so she could have retracked. Now, she did eventually get both the master's degree and a PhD, and went on to have another child as well. So all is not lost. But that was really shocking to me that an advisor would let something go that far.
Yes, that's horrific. And I wish I could say I don't see that very often, but I do see that quite often. I've just had to email a student this morning who said, is it normal that I've been sent through to defense so quickly? I don't feel like I'm ready. I don't feel like she read my chapter. And I had to say, that shouldn't be happening. It has happened. You need to be aware that they may fail you at defense because your supervisor shouldn't have sent you through. And really, they should have given you the time to work with me, because that's supposed to work. So she wasn't given any of that. So I see that happen a lot, and it really makes my blood boil. The supervisor's job the only real point of having the supervisor there is to monitor that work and tell the student you're on the right track, or you need to fix this, or that, your supervisor should never send you through to defense unless that work is ready to defend. Sometimes it's a hard conversation to have with a student where they think they're ready to go, but the supervisor's job is to put their foot down and say, no, you're not. Don't go through yet. It's not going to work. And I see a lot that the supervisors are either overworked, or they're incompetent, or they're lazy. Like, I hate to use those words, but I've just seen too many of them this week particularly. And then some of them just don't have time. Their institutions are forcing them to have too many students at once, and so they're kind of just churning them out.
Right. And then you do have the academic year as well, right? So sort of get to a time in the year, well, graduation's coming. We've got to kind of hurry through this stuff, and if they're being evaluated on the wrong measures, they may be pushing people through in the wrong way. Yeah. So one of the things that I've observed, most of my career has been in business, not in academia. One of the things that I have observed with people coming out of academia, and you referred to it previously, is the competitiveness that environment requires. And sometimes I see people coming out of academia, postdocs, for example, it's really difficult for them then to go into a workplace which is collaborative, because now they're expected to be a team member or even a team leader, and they're supposed to be collaborating, building a collaborative team, working with people in a way where everybody has an opportunity to succeed. We're not competing with each other anymore. We're competing with another company, right? We shouldn't be competing internally. And so one of the things that I was wondering was, what might people do to come out of that environment and be better collaborators by the time they hit whatever it is they're going to do afterwards, whether it is in academia where they might be leading a lab, for example, or whether they're going into business and need to collaborate in a business place.
I think that the top thing that will get you out of that mindset is to recognize you have it in the first place. I think what I've seen a lot of is, whether it's in industry or whether it is in something like academia, these environments become almost like these closed loops where they have their own little internal reality. Some crazy stuff happens and it seems like it's normal because everybody else around you is buying into it. So a lot of the students may not recognize that the pressure they feel, or the depression or the anxiety, is actually coming from the environment, that some of the things they're being asked for are not normal. Some of the behaviors that they are buying into are not good behaviors. So I think that's the top thing, is to, whatever environment you're in, is to stop and take stock, not within the context, but kind of holistically step outside. Who am I as a person? What is being asked of me? Is it reasonable in the wider scheme of things? I think a lot of the time in those situations, you become very reactive. How can I survive in this moment? What you need to do is step out and say, actually, what should my expectations of this situation be? And is this place, this environment, living up to it? So that when you then transition out of it, you can put that into perspective rather than taking it with you.
But it does take then that stepping away, or looking at it from the outside, or even looking at yourself, looking at your inside from the outside then. And do students feel when they're this moment of pressure, well, I've got to get this thesis or this dissertation done, and there's so much pressure, and do they feel that that's not something that they have time to do? How do you persuade people that it's worth taking a moment to breathe and think about things?
So it's usually not a case of persuasion. It's usually a case that they haven't even realized that it needs to happen. It's kind of two things. Is one, that you're usually kept so busy that you can't do it. And then also, like you said, you're on the inside. And the two things that help are having somebody from the outside step in and say, hold on a minute, let's ask some fundamental questions here. That's the kind of first thing. And the second thing is persuading them to take enough of a breathing space, a break or a pause, to be able to assess what's going on and to think and to breathe. And sometimes that means saying to them, listen, you're trying to meet this deadline, but you haven't seen this bigger issue that's occurring, whether that is that your work hasn't been assessed properly, or you don't even know why you're completing this degree, or whatever it might be. So ask for that extension. Tell your supervisor you're not meeting that deadline, you're making this other deadline instead. And now stop, pause, breathe, regroup. Let's think about what's actually going on here.
Do you see people who have been on the path, that planning to get this doctorate since they were 6 years old, or, whatever, parents expect it, and they're on the path, and they suddenly realize this isn't what I want to be doing, or what my purpose really is telling me to do?
Do you know what? Very rarely. I very
Yeah.
rarely see students like that. I more often see students who are doing this for themselves, who have kind of gotten to a certain point in their careers or their lives, and they think, this is something I've always wanted to do. Now I've got the opportunity to do it. Let me go back and do it. Some of them, it's because they want to start a business, or they're already running a business and they want that level of expertise. So these are very driven individuals who kind of have very strong goals in mind, but often those are very short-term goals or very vague goals. They're more emotive than they are necessarily practical.
So a lot of the people that you're working with are people who have, as you said, they have the short-term goal. I'm going to achieve this degree, but now they're going to, or having achieved it, they don't know where they're going or what they're going to do, and that's really interesting. Yeah, yeah. Does it make a difference to you whether? Well, of course, I think it does to anyone who's coaching, how coachable someone is willing to be. I mean, it sounds like the people who are coming to you are absolutely, they probably almost hit bottom, right? Or they have hit bottom and they really need the help. But do you find that sometimes they then struggle to be coachable?
Sometimes, very rarely, actually, I will say. I can only think of two, and I've got about 20, 23 clients at any given time, and I can only think of two from the last few months who I ended up, and usually what happens is I will assess very quickly, and if I don't think that person is coachable, I'll tell them up front, like, I don't think I can help you. You need this, go find it.
Yeah.
But it is very rare. Usually what will happen is they will find themselves caught between the advice I'm giving them and the pressures being put on them by their institution. So that's one situation that can make a student difficult to coach, is where you're saying, like, you need to take time on this chapter, or you need to revise this, or you actually are burnt out right now. You need to pause. And they're saying, no, supervisor says it's got to be in tomorrow. I've got to do this. So that can be quite tricky. And then sometimes there are students who are just, they don't know why they're doing the degree, and the degree really isn't the right thing for them. And that can be a hard message for people to hear sometimes. And so there are students sometimes that fall into that bracket.
So is it more of a case that when as you're redirecting people or helping people to redirect, are you delivering those messages, or are you helping them to find that message themselves, or both?
A little bit of both. Sometimes it's obvious, like very quickly. Sometimes it's not clear right away. But, my job as a coach is to be thinking about that even when the student isn't. So that's kind of there always in the background. And one of the things that I work a lot with my students on is, why are you actually doing this? What is your end goal here? The end goal isn't the defense. The end goal isn't submitting the draft. What is the end goal? Why are you doing this? What is the point? What knowledge do you want to get out of this? What skills do you want to get out of this? And why do you need them? Why do you want them? Because we always have to have that in mind. There's no point pushing yourself through this process if you don't know what you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah, so having that why, knowing what their purpose is, that's so important. And so it sounds like what you're doing is you're not just helping people through the mechanics of the process, but it sounds like you're, Dr. Jen, like you're really helping them to be better, more thoughtful people.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. And of course, 90% of it is the mechanics, but frequently my job is to make them pause and think and consider and reflect. And definitely a lot of the material I do around the coaching, so things like my newsletters and my social media content, is very much towards, are you remembering the self-care? Are you burnt out? Do you know why you're doing this? Don't forget that you do it slow for this reason. All of those kind of messages that I don't think they hear very often.
So slow ends up being fast, right? If you take that time to think. Yeah. Did you have this training as a classroom teacher, and so that was secondary school, right? That was so preteens and teenagers. It sounds as if you're working with people of a wider age range, right? So I'm sure you have some classic people who are in their early 20s, but probably it sounds like also that you have people who have gone back for a degree and who are older. Do you find that some of the things you learned that were helpful with the secondary school students are helpful with the adults? And if so, what kind of things?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, that is one of the things, and it surprised me when I started the business, but that's one of the things that actually makes me a good coach that I did not anticipate. But most people that will work with a dissertation student don't have those skills. So there are certain, being a teacher isn't something that you can just pick up and do it. You take a lot of training to do it, to be able to communicate ideas to people effectively and help them reach their potential. You know that because you're a coach. Like you don't just become a coach because you have an interest in something. You actually have to be a good coach to make it work. Same thing with teaching. A lot of professors don't have that. They haven't been trained as teachers. They're good at their subject and they're just in that position of teaching somebody their subject without any training whatsoever. Feedback is the biggest one. Feedback is a really specific thing that you have ways of doing, ways of delivering, things you should do, things you shouldn't do. You're going to get certain responses with some feedback that you won't get with other. And it's a skill. You have to learn it. You have to practice it. You have to be taught it. You have to train in it. I learned that as a classroom teacher. What should good feedback look like? If you want that kid to actually get better, what do you need to give them in terms of feedback? And that is one of the top areas that I see students struggle with in their degrees is they're not getting good feedback on their work. And as soon as you start giving them good feedback, not only does their work improve, but their mood, their mental health improves as well, because they feel confident and capable and like they can do this and like they're learning and they're growing and they get that growth mindset instead of this is hopeless, everything I do is wrong. So feedback is a top one.
That's so interesting to me. Again, going back to the situation that I'm familiar with of people coming out of academia and then going into business, because that is definitely, I completely agree with you that people come into a business situation and they don't know how to give feedback other than, something like that was wrong, do it again. Or, they don't know how to importantly, tell people when they've done something right. They sort of expect something to be done right. They don't tell people, hey, that was great. Can you do that like that again? And also that, when they do have to give what we euphemistically call constructive feedback, it's not constructive at all. Or they're afraid to. As well, because they have come out of a situation, and some academic situations I think are they're abusive, that they have been verbally abused. So that's the behavior that they think that they bring into other environments. Very interesting. I wonder why it is. Well, I probably know the answer, but why it is that people are put into the positions of leading other people, teaching other people, but not given these skills. I mean, but this is centuries of running at.
I was going to say the answer there is not
millennia of universities, Jen. This is not a new thing.
Well, I think that is the answer right there. These are systems that were set up back in the Middle Ages, and they just haven't been changed yet. That's the truth of it. They were set up back in the the 1700s or even earlier in some of the European institutions, but they were set up at a time where the knowledge was the key thing, and the people who were going to go into those situations were already well educated, privileged. They had all of that support, and so they didn't need to have amazing teachers because they were all on the same wavelength. It was a very closed, privileged system, and of course now it's opened up and there are people coming in and there are different goals. It's more career oriented. It's not, no longer about the joy of knowledge and the prestige of being such and such, but it's about what are you achieving in the world? What problems are you solving? And so the context of higher education has moved on, but the setup, the infrastructure is still stuck way back there. Yeah.
What differences do you see between the US and the UK in terms of how academia works?
I'm going to be very cautious answering this because I have not been in the UK actively for a good 10 years. Oh gosh, it is 10 years now. I do work with UK students though, so I can talk to this a little bit. Definitely, I see that there is more structure and rigidity to the degrees in the US and to a certain extent in Canada. There is more flexibility and more, I want to say, kind of more independent working. There's a little bit less. So in the US, a program might be structured into classes, and then you produce one of the chapters during a class and it gets graded against a rubric, and then you've passed the class or you failed the class. Usually in the UK, you do a degree, you're told, here's a research skills course. Okay, now go write your dissertation.
Yeah.
There isn't that structure to hold it in place. And also, very much US students are given a template, put this in section 1, put this in section 2, chapter 1 should look like this, tick these things off on a list. In the UK, it's very much more like you have to include these things, put them in whatever order you think makes sense. That can be both harder and easier. It really depends, because I've certainly seen students who are very bright struggling with that very rigid structure, saying, but it doesn't fit what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to express ideas and it doesn't fit. And I've seen students in the UK going, I have no idea how to get this onto the paper because there's literally no guidance on what I'm supposed to make it look like. And so both are, I think, difficult. They are just different. There's a lot more independence expected in the UK. And that is in part because of the school system, because definitely the students that I worked with as school students in the UK, their level of independence is about 4 or 5 years ahead of where US students are. So definitely the work I did with undergraduates in the US was the same level of work that I was doing with 11 and 12-year-olds in the UK. And that gives you a good idea, 11 to 8. There's a big gap there in the age at which they're expected to be able to work at a certain standard.
But people with, certain types of brains, right? So somebody who really benefits from structure, they might do better in the US, but I can see really struggle in the UK, but somebody who really doesn't want to be in that box, might do better in the UK, provided they can provide enough of their own structure, or have a coach like you who can give them structure. I mean, I could see, someone like myself, kind of wandering off and getting distracted by other interesting things and having a hard time finishing in the UK system. Certainly, but for other people, it must be like blessed freedom. Really feel wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too what you're saying about sort of the academic differences, right? I think that I actually experienced both school systems, but a long time ago, and it's definitely very big differences. It's interesting to see that they still exist.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. If you had that opportunity, Dr. Jen, to talk to somebody at that point that you would like to talk to them, right when they're starting to think about, get ready to work on their dissertation, what would be the 2 or 3 things that you would tell them to do to make sure they're starting out in the right way?
I think first thing would be to set your boundaries with your program and your supervisor. Set them early and then stick to them. So that might mean things like deciding what kind of feedback you want. And if you don't get it that very first time you submit work, sit down with that supervisor and say, this isn't good enough. I need this from you. Let's work out how you can give that to me. Or I want to meet every single week to check over my work. Or I would like you to be honest with me about this, or here are my concerns. You have to have those conversations. And you have to have them early. You can't wait until there's difficulties and then try and change that relationship. So I'd say start that relationship off on the right foot first when you're just starting out. That's kind of the first thing. Second thing is recognize, even if nobody else around you is saying it, that everybody is struggling. Probably other people are having the same difficulties you are. Ask for help and accept help. And be very proactive about help. And that means having the courage to admit when you don't know how to do something, and not to kind of blame yourself or think that you're no good because you can't do it. Recognize no one person can do everything the minute they sit down to try and do it. Everybody has to learn certain skills. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. So just accept yours and then go find the help you need to get better at it. And then the last thing I would tell them is have a network, like establish your network early on. And that doesn't just mean the people in your institution, like the writing studios or the librarian. It means like you have kids, get your mom lined up for some babysitting. It means find the service that you're going to use to order takeout when you don't have time to cook. Have the friend available that you can cry on their shoulder when you're having a bad day. Like, no, don't wait until you're in the situation and then be scrambling trying to work that stuff out. Like, just set yourself up for success with a network in place.
Wow. That's such great pieces of advice, I think, for anybody. And I just want to go back to the first one, talk a little bit more about that. And so really going to your supervisor and saying, this is the kind of feedback I need. that you talked about, having courage. That takes courage, right? For some people, if they've always been, the teacher, the professor is, they're sort of above me. I shouldn't be asking for things from them. That must take courage for some people to go and do that. I'm sure for others they're probably used to it, but
yeah, and they tend to not need as much help because they're already doing
right.
what they need to do. But yeah, it takes a huge amount of courage. It can be really hard, especially as some of the supervisors don't respond to that particularly positively. But even if you don't get that positive response, that's what you need to do to be a responsible student. And sometimes if you don't get a good response to that, it's time to look for a different supervisor or to file a complaint or to talk to the program director, but never kind of assume that you have to accept poor supervision and a lack of support as the norm and something you have to put up with. Like, you have to advocate for what you need.
Wow. Wow. Oh, I really like that. Yeah. Yeah. And I can see where that you could even, I'm just thinking from a lean perspective, one of the things that I might say as a lean coach, and I'm not going to do the work you do, but as a lean coach, I would say to somebody, this, let's do an experiment. Do an experiment. Go and ask your supervisor for these things. Find out what happens. You have a hypothesis that's going to help you. Let's see, is your hypothesis correct or not? If not, let's do a little scientific learning cycle. Well, what do we need to adjust? How do we go back and do this again? So you could really almost teach scientific thinking while someone's going through this cycle of learning to work with and help their supervisor be a better supervisor.
Yeah.
Actually helping to develop the supervisor. So good.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
Great for your future work. Yeah. 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 Wow. I'm just saying, if everybody went through like the Dr. Jen approach and had you, I'm thinking when they graduate and so, come into the workplace, I think that they'd be better in the workplace as well.
Certainly better equipped to support themselves, and you can never do a good job for somebody else unless you're supporting yourself.
Yeah. Put on your own oxygen mask first, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. What kind of support do people need at the very end? We talked about the beginning. What do people really need at the very end? And it might not just be from you, but you already talked about, you got the DoorDash on speed dial and the friend. What do people need at those moments where, like, the deadline is here? That I have a date for my defense. What do they need?
So the surface level, obviously what they need is to feel prepared, like they're sitting down and they're going to succeed. It's very much mental health preparation at that point. The work is already done, but they feel worried or anxious, and so you need to build their confidence. But I think beyond that, for a lot of them, that's a transition point. They're going to be moving into something else after this thing has consumed their whole life for many, many months. And so part of it is, what are you going to do next? Who are you going to turn to? Do you have plans? What's the next step? What are you excited about next? Like, that's the key question. Don't fall into that post-dissertation slump of what do I do with myself now? Like, a lot of them need a rest and a break, but also like find something to be excited about so that you are not going to get stuck once you're done. Like, you've done this big thing and then you don't know what to do next.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure some of them already have like a postdoc lined up, and other people, oh no, I've got to start a job search and
a postdoc or job. A lot of them have those things lined up, and they still feel that, yeah, but why? Why? What am I doing? Why am I doing? It's kind of like you roll through step after step after step that's on the list that you were given at the age of 11, and then suddenly you realize that you are on the last step of the list. And oh, wait, why did I do the list in the first place?
And they promised me rainbows and ponies, and I'm not seeing any, right? So
yeah. And it doesn't usually involve big life shifts, but it does sometimes involve a little bit of a mindset shift. Like, you're going into this job, you did that for a reason. You got to remember what that reason was. You were excited about it when you applied. Now you're just tired. So you got to get that excitement back.
Yeah. And find time to take a rest, right? Take that time and celebrate yourself. That's really great. Dr. Jen, I think listening to this, I know there are people listening to this who are thinking about, I want to go back to school. I want to get another degree. How would they find you? What's the best way to find you?
Absolutely. Best way to find me is to go to my website and book a free call. That's the best way, because then you get to sit down and you get to chat with me. So the website is www.read.write.perfect.com. And there are buttons all over the website that say book a free call. So you click on those and actually sit down and have a chat with me. But people can also find me on Twitter or X. I am at perfect_write. And they can also find me on LinkedIn, both, RWP on LinkedIn, or I think I'm Jen Harrison, some string of numbers. I can look them up and send them.
But you're pretty easy to find, though.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's your one piece of advice for a young person starting out, and say just starting out at anything?
I think my one piece of advice is to know your why. I think that getting used to that reflection, knowing what you're trying to do, not for the next week or the next month or the next 3 years, like who do you want? What do you want on your tombstone? Like, who do you want to be remembered for? What is your mission in life? Like, that doesn't have to be fixed in stone, but you should always have a clear idea of what that is right now. What is it you want to achieve long term right now? And maybe next week it will change, maybe it won't, but that's what you need to be able to move through life feeling confident, with purpose, making the right decisions, or at least making strong decisions. They may not be right, but they'll do for now. And also, when things get really, really tough, if you know why you're doing it, you'll find it easier to weather that and be resilient.
I really like that. Know your why. And I think, to your point, it's worth taking the time to figure out what that is. Yes. Wow. Well, Dr. Jen Harrison, thank you so much for traveling with me to the edges of Lean. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
This is Bella Engelbach, and I'd like to thank Dr. Jen Harrison for being my guest at the edges of Lean. What did you learn from this conversation? What ideas did it spark? We would love to hear from you. You can find Dr. Jen at Read.Write.Perfect.com and on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn or at leanforhumans.com. You could join me at the Lean Coaching Summit in Indianapolis in July, or you can comment wherever you watch or listen. Don't forget to subscribe and check out all my friends in the Lean Communicators community at leancommunicators.com, where you'll find lots of great new content every week. The Edges of Lean is written and produced by Bella Engelbach with support from Podcast Inc. This is a Lean for Humans production.